going to be a little different because it's definitely time stamped for current events. But today I'm going to be talking about 3 reasons why I think the United States is entering the early stages of a new civil war. Now, I know that this is a very controversial topic right now. The United States is very polarized, and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of middle ground. But the truth is that we, who are Americans who live here, if this is true, then we should all be concerned no matter what your political affiliation is, because a civil war is going to affect everyone. And so that's the reason why I'm recording this video, and then I want to open up the conversation to hear what people in different parts of the country and people of different political ideologies and beliefs think. So, to dive in, number one, a little about me. I grew up in an area called Hampton Roads, Virginia, near a place called the Historic Triangle. And the Historic Triangle is 3 cities that are very integral in American history, in the United States history. And those cities are Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. So they're called the Historic Triangle. And where I grew up is only about 15 to 20 minutes away from each one of those places. So I grew up surrounded by American history, both Revolutionary War history and colonial history, from when European settlers first came to the United States, what later became the United States, in the 13 colonies, where they landed at Jamestown in 1607, which, as far as we know, is the first permanent English settlement, English meaning from England, on the continent of North America. And so I grew up hearing about American history all the time. Obviously, it was incredibly whitewashed, and so I had to supplement what I learned from school and from going to museums and the different places that you can go that are kind of like living museums in this area. I had to supplement that by redoing research on my own or hearing stories from people whose families were part of that history, including my own family. So, for example, 2 of the big places involved in the Civil War place involved in the Civil War was Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and that was where the abolitionist John Brown tried to blow up a Confederate armory, because he was trying to hamper the Confederate attempts to continue fighting the Federalists, or the North. And that incident is, by many historians, marked as the one that started the Civil War. I also grew up near another area, which is Appomattox, Virginia, and that is where the Civil War ended, where it was officially ended. So I grew up surrounded by history, and so maybe that's why I'm seeing more connections between what has happened before and what's happening now. But as a result, I am deeply aware of the way that the U.S. developed, and I know that that's not the experience of most Americans, because most people didn't grow up in an area that was so surrounded by history, especially if you didn't grow up in the mid-Atlantic or on the East Coast, somewhere between Philadelphia and, I would say, North Carolina. But one of the things that I'm concerned about, with what we've been seeing going on recently, is that people aren't making the connections between what has happened before and what's happening now. So I'll get into those 3 reasons. The first reason is the federal government is being said, by local officials in Portland and the governor of Oregon. It's being said that they are occupying a U.S. city against the demands of that local government. So both the mayor of Portland and the governor of Oregon have demanded that the U.S. government remove federal agents who are occupying that city. What has been happening is that federal agents with no official uniform, no identification, in rented unmarked vehicles have been going around the city of Portland, perhaps near places where people are protesting, and snatching people off the streets into these unmarked vans. There are reports of people being beaten and then returned to the streets without ever being charged or officially arrested. So basically, people being abducted, beaten, and then released, which essentially, I mean, that's just a tactic to make people afraid, to scare people. If you know that if you're out and about and the government suspects you of having participated in a protest, that you could be disappeared off the streets for a period of time and beaten. So obviously government officials are not happy about this. They have, they're like, this is breaking the law. Federal government is not above the law. And so they've demanded that the federal government remove federal marshals and Department of Homeland Security officials from Portland. And the federal government has said they will not do this. In fact, taking me to number 2, the federal government has used a chemical weapon against a government official in Portland. So in the past 24 hours, there have been reports that tear gas was fired at a crowd where the mayor of Portland was speaking to his citizens who were protesting, that he was out and he was saying Black Lives Matter, and he was trying to quell some of the unrest by letting the demonstrators and protesters know that he intends to listen to them and that he hears what they're complaining about, especially, I would imagine in the past week or two with the abductions that the U.S. government has been being conducted. So he was addressing his citizens, and not only one canister, but multiple canisters have been were fired into the crowd, and it impacted the mayor. I have personally watched the video of it happening, and I can include the video from the New York Times, which is the one I saw about 5 different ones, but I can include the video from the New York Times in the description below. So that is a clear escalation. It is tear gas is a chemical weapon. Has been designated as a chemical weapon not only by our government but by international governments. And it would be hard to defend that the federal agents didn't know that the governor was there, because everyone else knew. The crowd was responding to him. It seemed like they weren't necessarily responding in the most favorable way, because the mayor of Portland has been accused of allowing the Portland Police Department to use tear gas on protesters on peaceful protesters in the past. And actually the ACLU is suing them, the city, for that use. So in a twist of irony, which still doesn't make it right, he actually experienced being tear gassed while trying to talk to his own citizens and being tear gassed by the federal government. Number 3, so a couple of days ago, the president released a list of cities that he intends to expand by sending federal agents there. The first city was Chicago, but then there was an expanded list of cities that included Albuquerque, Kansas City, Missouri, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, New York City, and Philadelphia. And the district attorney and lead prosecutor of Philadelphia responded to that by saying that if federal agents come to Philadelphia and use the same tactics that they have been using in Portland, that he is prepared to arrest federal agents for breaking the law in Philadelphia. Now, I mean, there's so many things that can be said about that, but first of all, I mean, this is clearly a case of the federal government exchanging threats with the local government. And so the governor, the fact that the not governor, but that the district attorney of Philadelphia is saying that he is ready to arrest federal agents is alarming, because that means that he is expressing that that city is feeling threatened by the president saying that he's going to send federal agents there in the first place. This is not something that has been requested or recommended, that the federal government is not collaborating with local law enforcement like they typically do. There's often, frequently, collaboration between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement. And the issue of law enforcement and the way that it's done in the United States is a whole issue in and of itself. But in this situation, it is actually caused, like, the federal government's escalation and occupation of cities against the desires of the local officials is escalating the situation, because it is causing those officials to feel threatened and to feel like they might have to use their own police force to defend their citizens against federal officials, federal agents, who are not abiding by the typical protocols that they usually do when interacting in jurisdictions outside of Washington, D.C. So, curious to know what you all think. Please comment, please like and subscribe. I am going to have another video that's coming up with me having a conversation with a friend of mine who is from Venezuela, who we're going to be talking about some similarities and differences between the things that are happening here and things that happened in Venezuela, which eventually have led to a civil war that is still ongoing as we speak. But I want to hear what you all think and what your concerns are, and open the conversation. So please put a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can see the series of videos that I will be having on this topic coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul.